Greetings, school directors and friends of public education. Thanks for joining us for WSSDA's InSession Live. It is Thursday, February 27th. Happy to be able to spend the next hour with you today and with one of our favorite colleagues, Dan Steele from the Washington Association of School Administrators, to drop some knowledge on us about the state of the state as it relates to school funding and finance. Maybe there will be some good news he can relay, but mostly just updates to keep you apprised. Until we get there, I just wanted to acknowledge that our public lands, our public schools and facilities operate on the traditional lands of Indigenous peoples, and we engage in the 2025 legislative session, remembering that the lands of our state capital were cared for by the people of the Squaxin and Nisqually tribes. We make these acknowledgments to open a space of recognition, inclusion, and respect for our sovereign tribal partners and all Indigenous students, families, staff, legislators, and board members in our communities. A little bit in the know. There are two links provided here that I'm not going to go into too much depth because there's a lot to dig into. If you have some curiosities about it, maybe we'll go a little further next week, but wanted you to know that the floor schedule for both the House and the Senate are available online. It gives you a picture of which bills are up for floor debate, and you are able to watch those debates through TVW, and would encourage you to be keeping a lookout for some of our favorite bills around potentially MSOC and special education as we hope for their advancement out of fiscal committees this week. Without further ado, and to make sure we give him ample time, we love that word ample, Dan, to share an update on what's going on with the legislature and how school finance and the state budget is looking. I'm going to pass it to my friend and colleague, Dan Steele, to take it from here.
Great. Thanks, Marissa. Appreciate the opportunity. Let me, if I can drop my share on there. So when Marissa actually originally asked me to talk, it was really more kind of the basics of the budget. So I kind of focused most of this presentation really on the budget and what some of the details are and that sort of thing. We can certainly talk about issues and that sort of thing if you'd like, but I know the big three and the other key issues that are floating around. I know you've had a lot of conversation with Marissa and Levon already. So really going to focus in on the budget stuff and going to kind of fly through fairly quickly. If you have questions, if I'm going too fast, if there's something that needs more detail, we can certainly slow down a little bit. But the first thing I want to show you is this that you've probably seen from me or Marissa or other folks along the way, but this really is a comparison of the overall state operating budget, that blue line that's being spent on all areas of government. The green line, which is mostly below the blue line, is what the percentage of the operating budget is dedicated to K-12 education. And there's a couple of things I want to point out. First of all, if you look where it started to ramp up, it's 2012, 2013. And remember the timing of that the McCleary decision was brought down by the Supreme Court in January 2012. And at that point, the legislature said, oh boy, we're not complying with the Constitution. We better start providing more funding. And you can see that there was a ramp up at that point. At one point there, we actually crossed over and had more money going to K-12 education than other areas of government, jumped up over 50%. And again, the timing's important. It was 2017, 2018, where we actually crossed over the line. And remember that in 2017, the legislature adopted their so-called McCleary solution, which required them to provide a significant increase in K-12 education. So at that point, we crossed over. Very pleased about that, good thing. But then almost immediately, we dropped down and went under the 50%, and we keep going down. We're at about 43% right now. And you can see the blue line at that same point where we started going down spiked up because the legislature basically said they had pent up priorities. We're going to spend money on areas other than K-12 education. So this is the scenario right now that we're dealing with. But I also want to step back and remind you that the 50% number is not really a valid metric. What we should be concerned about is whether or not K-12 education, basic education, is being amply funded. And if we're amply funded with 5 or 10% of the overall budget, I think we would be satisfied with that. If it takes 50 or 70%, that's what it takes. So 50% really is kind of a false metric, but part of the reason we show this is that it shows that there are priorities outside of K-12, outside of the paramount duty, the legislators are focusing in on more than us. The other issue is when they crossed over that 50% barrier, virtually every legislator patted themselves on the back, ran around, talked in their newsletters about how great they were doing for K-12 education. Well, they're not talking about that anymore because that percentage keeps going down. So I just want to have you keep that in mind. So this is the historical look for over the last 9 years or so of the forecasted revenue growth in the state. And you can see that our state economy is really good. I mean, it's running hot. And this is an average of about 9% over this course of 9 years. And the legislature, when there's additional money, they want to actually spend additional money. The problem, though, is if you look into the future a little bit, you can see that revenues continue or projected to increase. Except for that little blip in fiscal year 2024, revenues continue to increase. They keep coming into the state. We have more money than we've ever had before. The problem is the increase starting to flatten off. And so the problem, and I don't want to get too political here, but the problem that we have with the 10 to 12 billion dollar shortfall is that legislators knew this information. The economic forecaster told them this is what's going to happen in the next several years. But instead, the legislature continued spending at the same rate they had been when we had 9% average increases. The next several years is an average of about 3%, but again, the legislature continued to spend like it was before. And you just can't do that more for more than a little bit of time before you come into a problem. I have to tell you that if any school boards, any school districts actually spent more money than they actually had coming in, all of you would be recalled. Your superintendent and CFO would probably be fired. But the legislature, they do what they want to do. And so we're sitting looking at a 10 to $12 billion shortfall. Even though we're talking about a shortfall, again, I talked about revenue continuing to increase. The current budget to the next budget is projected to increase by about $5 billion. The next biennium is again is projected to increase another $5 billion. So there is more money coming in, but again, the reason we have a shortfall is that the legislature for the last couple of years has spent more money than they actually had in the bank and more money that they projected to receive in the future. And so that's a real problem. So I want to, one of the issues of the increases and the required increases while we have such a big shortfall is the caseloads keep changing that impacts the maintenance level. So maintenance level, we'll talk about that a lot. Maintenance level is really basically having the same spending that you've had before, but making adjustments, required adjustments for inflation, for caseloads, and other enrollment issues. So, for example, in K-12 education, if we have more special ed kids, our caseload goes up. In corrections, if there's less people going to prison, their caseload goes down. Medicaid, social services, all of those things go up or down. And so, one of the problems, though, is maintenance level, which again is the major driver, is calculated in different ways. The Office of Financial Management, which is the governor's budget office, the Economic and Revenue Forecast Council, the House and the Senate, all four of those bodies calculate maintenance level in a different way. So it's really hard to figure out what maintenance level is and what the actual shortfall is. Obviously, at the end of the session, the governor, the legislature, they're going to have to come together and agree on what maintenance level is to actually adopt a budget. But this just shows you where the concerns are with the increase. So this comes from the November 24 revenue forecast. OPR is the Office of I can't even remember what it stands for, but it's the House Appropriations. Basically, it's the office that actually um, works with the legislature on the House side. In an OFM, as I mentioned, is the governor's budget office. CBAs are the state employee collective bargaining agreements. So this shows you the estimate of the shortfall using different numbers. So with the House Appropriations Committee using their maintenance level number, they originally projected about $4.4 billion in the current biennium and then $7.7 billion in the next biennium. So about $12 billion. OFM, again, the governor's budget office, is a little bit higher. If you looked at the governor's budget proposal in December, Governor Inslee, the outgoing governor, his maintenance level was even higher than these numbers are. And then it's also able to be calculated again, the House appropriations, including the state employee collective bargaining agreement. There's a debate about whether or not the collective bargaining agreements are maintenance level or if it's a policy decision. So they're actually separated out, and you can see the different numbers there. The projections of the shortfall dramatically increases. On the right-hand side is what the Economic and Revenue Forecast Council puts together as a 4.5% revenue growth percentage. And it's important to know that when the Economic and Revenue Forecast Council provides these numbers, the legislature by law, when they talk about their outlook and their spending, they can either use the 4.5% revenue growth or whatever actual growth is. And the legislature for the last several years has used the arbitrary 4.5% growth number, even though projected growth was between 2.5% and 3.5%. So again, they knew that their revenues weren't going to meet that 4.5%, but because it was allowed in their projections and law, that's what they used. And again, that's part of the reason we came up with this shortfall. If you look at those 4.5% numbers, you can see that the numbers are actually lower than what the forecasted revenues are. So getting into some of the weeds here, and it's probably some detail that you're not necessarily interested in. But if you look at the maintenance level changes, these are the maintenance level changes over the next biennium for each of the different sectors of government. And you can see down the K-12, huge increase of about $1.3 billion. Almost all of that increase in that $1.3 billion is for compensation. And I have to tell you, it's important for you to know the maintenance level number for K-12 because I will tell you at the end of the session when they adopt a budget, K-12 education will increase between $1 and $2 billion. And on the face of it, that's great. That's what we're looking for. We need more investments in K-12. But you have to understand that if most of the money is going for compensation and going for maintenance level, it means all of the programs that you're currently operating that are underfunded, they're not getting additional dollars. And so I think it's important to put those numbers in context about whether or not we're getting policy level decisions or we're getting maintenance level decisions. So I want to talk about Jay Inslee's budget just really quickly to show you where he was coming from, his proposal in December. His total spending increases of about $7.5 billion. And I just showed you the numbers, the increase about $5 billion. And obviously, well, you can't spend more money than you have. In fact, we have all these deficit spending in DC. Washington State is not allowed to have a deficit budget. It must be balanced at the end of when they actually adopt the budget. So how does the governor actually get away with this? Maintenance level increases, again, a little bit higher than what I was just showing you in that previous slide, but about $5.4 billion. Policy level, again, discretionary issues, about $2 billion. And how does he get away with actually doing that? Well, he also proposes a new revenue package of about $4.4 billion. This is $4.4 billion for 25-27. That increases over the 4-year period of time to about $12 billion. So a pretty significant increase in his budget. So I don't want to necessarily talk about the details. You've got a link down there to the governor's budget if you want more details. But I just want to move along and talk about K-12 and the governor's proposal. Again, spending increases about $2 billion. Great, that's awesome. But when you look at it, the maintenance level, the required spending in the governor's budget for maintenance level is $2.4 billion. And wait a minute, that's higher than what he actually wants to spend in total. So what does that mean? His policy level, the discretionary areas, actually is a reduction for K-12 education. So if this budget passed tomorrow, legislators and the public and the governor would be talking about, boy, we just provided 2.13 billion dollars for K-12 education. And they'd be very happy about it. But when we look at the policy level, it's actually a reduction, and that's not a good thing for K-12 education. Number of increases in this area, again, don't want to go through those details, but want to show you this. Again, we showed that maintenance level increase. Let's talk about policy level. You can see here that policy level, we're on the left-hand side in the negative of how much our budget is actually being increased in the policy level. And that's not a good thing for K-12 education. So this is also his overall budget. I talked about us being about 43% of the overall operating budget. If his budget actually passed, that would actually drop down to 41.9%. Now, I will tell you, this budget's not going to pass. Governor's gone. This is essentially a throwaway budget, but it actually provides some information for the legislature as they carry forward to move for their own budget. So we've got a new governor. Oh, let me back up and talk about this first. So the governor's budget is a revenue budget, but when the governor releases a budget, he's required by law to introduce a no new revenue budget. And the no new revenue budget is called the Book One budget. What he released with revenues is called a Book Two budget or a new law budget. What this shows is the Book One budget or the current law budget versus the new law or Book Two with revenues. And for K-12 education, so the first two columns are the new law with no new revenues using currently what we have. And you can see down below that there'd be a reduction of about $131 million. So if you look over in the next two columns, that's the new law, essentially what he actually introduced in December. And you go down to the bottom, you can see there's reductions of about $210 million. And what's interesting about this and frustrating about it is if Jay Inslee introduced a budget that had no new revenue, K-12 education would be reduced by $131 million. In the budget where he actually said, I want to increase taxes by $4.4 billion, K-12 education actually has a greater loss. If you carry over to the last couple of columns, this is actually the 4-year total. So again, Jay Inslee in the new law budget is talking about increasing $12 billion in taxes. The reduction proposed for K-12 is $500,000. If he has no new revenue, the reduction over 4 years is $260 million. How that happens, I don't know, but it really shows you that the priority of the governor is not and was not K-12 education. But he's gone, he's away. So we've got a new governor. Again, not going to go through all the details. You've got a link to his budget priorities if you'd like to look at them. He is actually saying, before we start talking about taxes, let's scrub the budget, see if we can find some savings and efficiencies. And he's actually proposed a reduction of about $4.4 billion general fund. Just in the last hour or so, we had a press conference to actually talk about the details of this. And one of his priorities is to not make any cuts in K-12 education, but they did find about $4 billion worth of cuts that have been submitted by state agencies. They've reviewed them, And so we're going to be seeing more information there. So this kind of walks through the details. The majority of that $4.4 billion, about $4 billion of it comes from across the board 6% reduction in most state agencies, excluding the state patrol, excluding K-12 education, and a couple other areas. So this is where the new governor, has actually found some work, and it should also add that $4 billion. He's actually accepting Jay Inslee's reduction. So if you add the four to the three, he's actually proposing some recommendations. That's about a $7 billion reduction, which leaves still a little bit of a hole that the legislature is going to have to grapple with, and they're probably going to actually adopt some tax revenues. So that's all I've got with the budget. I just wanted to make sure you kind of knew kind of the overall situation. Again, what we're looking for, WASA and WASDA and the rest of the education community, is actually talking about basic education, looking for about $1.5 billion. And one of our messages, I'm sure you're aware of this, but one of our messages is we don't want to play in this revenue conversation because the legislature has more than enough money to amply fund basic education. The concern is their priorities have not been on K-12 education. So if they want to actually raise revenue to deal with other issues, fair enough, let them do that. But they shouldn't be raising revenue on the backs of K-12 education. Um, so that's all I've got, but I wanted to make sure there was enough time for Levon to do his work and whatever conversation you have. But I also wanted to take some time to answer any questions, either on the budget or policy issues or anything else you might have on your mind.
Thanks so much, Dan. You know more about school finance than most of us or many of us combined. So I appreciate your insights. One very important question that was asked is, can they get a copy of the slide deck? That's a very important question.
Well, I actually sent it to Marissa, so it's up to her whether or not she wants to send it on.
Hmm, maybe for $6 billion.
Yeah.
Yes, I will send it out to the group. I will upload it into the chat, but I know some of you have a challenge getting that. So if you would email me directly, then I can send it to you in attachment for any of you who would like to have access to it. And then I guess it might be helpful for folks to get a sense. Dan, you and I have been on many emails and text message exchange over the last 24 hours about the ever-changing landscape of our priority bills.
Yep.
So I imagine there are some questions about where we stand with those. Do you mind giving just a quick overview of what it's looking like right now from your perspective?
Yeah, so I'll just give you really quick, and you can tell me if you agree or disagree. But for special education, Senate Bill 5263 is kind of our major issue. Coming out of the Education Committee, they dramatically lowered the tiered multipliers. So we're supporting that bill, but we're hoping at the end of the day they actually go back and increase the multipliers. On the House side, 1310 was kind of our major bill. The House Appropriations Committee in the last couple of days, though, has actually set that down. They're not going to adopt that bill. They've actually brought forward 1357. I believe it's 1357, 1367 is a bill from Monica Stonier that provides a very, very, very minor increase in the tiered multipliers, but also focuses in on inclusionary practices. Again, we're hoping that those numbers actually go up, whether it be the House bill or the Senate bill at the end of the day when they actually adopt a budget. On MSOC, Senate Bill 5192 has about a 10% increase in the MSOC numbers. Um, what the bill does, though, I'm not going to go into all the details, but the major issue with that bill is it takes the current 8 categories, individual categories for insurance and libraries and technology and the other issues, and actually merges them together. It makes it one funding source, and we get a lump sum. You get about a 10% increase. At the end of the year, though, school districts have to actually report to OSPI using the current 8 categories about where you spent your money. So there's some technical issues with that bill and some concerns about the philosophy of it. But that bill is moving forward. On the House side, our preferred bill, House Bill 1338, was actually introduced at the request of us, and it included everything we were asking for. Unfortunately, that bill is moving forward in appropriations probably in the next hour or two, and they actually have a striking amendment on the table, which is likely going to pass without too much difficulty. I'm sure all of the Democrats are going to say, yeah, let's do it. And it actually takes about a $310 million influx of cash for an increase of 20% of all of those categories and drops it down to about a 5% increase. You remember last year when we were looking for a $300 or $400 per student increase, and we ended up getting a $21 increase per student. For Seattle, $21 times 40,000, that's some real money. If you have a school district that has 150 or maybe even 1,000, that's not much money. If they actually talk about this increase, so we are actually trying to eliminate the gap between expenditures and revenues, dropping it down to $5 per student. I don't know what that's going to give. If you're in a school district that has 1,000 kids, 1,000 times 5, you can probably actually just have a pizza party for all the staff, and then it's eaten up. Not that you should use MSOC for pizza parties, but my point. So we're really concerned about that bill, and a lot of the work that Marissa was just talking about this morning. We've been sending emails to the Appropriations Committee expressing our severe concern and disappointment that they're taking the best bill that we have on the table and dramatically altering it. Don't use these terms with legislators usually, but what the amendments do is gut the bill, and it won't really do much of anything for us. So very concerned about that. I should also mention transportation as a part of our big three package. The Senate bill 5187 got out of the Education Committee. It doesn't look like it's going to pass out of the Ways and Means Committee. And the House bill was introduced late and has had no action at all. So we're left with competing special ed bills, and we're left with competing MSOC bills, one of which is going to be uh, uh, not a pale version of the original on the House side. So we've got a lot of work left to do. 45 days in, we still have 60, what is it, 61, whatever the
59.
number is, 59. Oh, yeah, it's even better. Left to go. And so um, what we've talked about, and I think Marissa's mentioned this to you before, is now is the time when a lot of people get tired and it's like, okay, I've sent in my notes, I'm gonna go do something else now. Now's the time to actually push the pedal down a little bit farther. We have more work to do, especially now that we see what the House especially wants to do with our bills. It's really important for us to continue to be engaged. And I know a lot of you have been. If you haven't, now's the time. If you have, ramp it up.
Yeah, I think I used the expression "put the pedal to the metal."
Yep.
This is Dan and my second Zoom meeting of the day. We probably got a couple more and lots more text message exchanges to go. Um, just so you all know, I sent out a call to action to the Ledge Committee members who you should be hearing from, representing director areas, messaging first year House appropriations members as well as Senate Ways and Means about what the real implications for those bill, especially the striking amendment on 1338. I got a really helpful email back, and this school district is planning on sharing this with their legislators, that the original version of the bill would have provided their district with approximately $3 million to support MSOC. That would have closed their existing funding shortfall in that area. Instead, with the striking amendment on 1338, they'd be receiving approximately $50,000 total for their district. So, which is peanuts, right?
Yep.
Buy a few books with that. So I would encourage you to use that kind of data when you're communicating with your legislators. The bigger the numbers, the more fairy tale like they may seem, but when you actually give concrete numbers like that, it really illuminates what the bill's proposing it won't do really, which is meet the basic education needs of our students. So use those real stories, put the pedal to the metal, do not let up right now, because if we let this go unnoticed, then we'll wake up in 2 weeks and decisions will have been
Yeah.
made without our voice. It's very dangerous for us to be quiet.
Yeah, I will let you know that, today, last couple of days has been really disappointing and just kind of disheartening. But we still have some hope that if we continue to push especially the Senate, I think is going to kind of have our backs to a certain degree. And so there's going to be a fight between the House and the Senate. Also, I should have mentioned in all the talk about the budget, March 18th, the revenue forecast is going to come out, and that will actually trigger some action by legislators. They're working on budgets and reductions right now, but as soon as that forecast comes out, they'll do some tweaks to actually match what the new numbers are, and then we'll start seeing legislative budget proposals. And um, unfortunately, right now, if the House released their budget proposal tomorrow, I'm sure it's going to include a $5 increase in MSOC, and so that will be the next battle to actually deal with the budget issues.
I think we're clear of questions in the chat, but I would invite folks to keep asking them if you have them. In the meantime, I will ask for some predictions, Dan. Is this a setup? Is this a setup right now? Like, you got to see the bills the way you were hoping for, responsive to your needs. Now we're slicing them because this is the reality we're working in. If you want us to get back to the originals, we're gonna have to increase revenue, aka taxes.
Yeah.
So don't fight us on this. Don't get in the way if you actually want your bills. Am I being too Machiavellian about this,
I
or is there maybe some truth to that?
I think that's part of the issue. The House especially is really pushing this message of if we don't have revenue, there's going to be devastating cuts. And oh, by the way, K-12 education, all your increases, they're not going to be there. And so I think that's part of the issue. I would just caution school board members or educators generally to be careful of the revenue conversation. The message that we've sent to them is a number of different pieces. Number one, we're not tax experts. We're educators. You figure out how to fund us, and then we'll deal with what we need to do in terms of curriculum and actually getting our kids to the bar. The second thing is K-12 education is the paramount duty, and the three issues that we're asking for specifically are basic education items that are required constitutionally to be amply funded, and they're not. And so try to be careful about how you say this to legislators, but you know what? You've got more than enough money to amply fund us. What you're doing is using the money that's currently in the budget for other things outside of your required paramount duty. And so those are a couple of things, in my mind, again, you have to be careful about actually using those words and that tone with legislators. But getting back to your original question, I do think this partially is a little bit of a show to express to us that we're asking for more than they can actually bear unless they actually figure out how to get a tax package. And by the way, it's interesting to note, I'm sure you're aware of this, but the tax increase conversation has not really been hanging out there for the first 4 or 5 weeks of session. But just this week, all four of the budget committees, the Ways and Means Appropriations, Capital Budget, and finance, all of them have been rolling through a series of tax and fee increases. And so they're actually setting the stage for themselves to actually be prepared to say, what can we actually adopt? What can't we adopt? So the tax conversation will be a major issue.
Okay, last question from me, unless somebody else asks one, but do you think that leads us to a special session?
Yeah, so you and I have talked about this a bunch, and there are some rumblings from some key legislators saying, you know what, we might not be able to get this done in 105 days. I'm not sure about that. Once we see the budgets, we'll get a better idea about how far apart the House and Senate are and how much they have to figure out in terms of revenue and that sort of thing. But what we're hearing specifically is there's some real tension, especially in the House Democrat caucus, about what to buy, about how much to raise, about what to raise. And if you have dissension within one caucus, they're not going to be able to come to an agreement to actually pass anything. Um, the Senate Democrats sounds like they're more coalesced, and the Jamie Peterson is kind of corralling them a little bit better. But if the House Democrats can't agree internally about what to do, it may very well force extra time.
Thanks. We won't, so in other words, we probably won't have a good sense for that definitively until April.
Yeah, probably not. And in fact, what oftentimes happens, they'll release a budget and people start talking about, oh, this is going to take a special session, and in a week later, it's like, oh, everything's coming together, and the farther apart they are, usually is the easier to come together for whatever strange reason the human nature acts in the process. But yeah.
It's
So be on the lookout.
everyone's.
We're hoping 105 days because I know all of you are starting to actually draft your budgets, and it's really difficult to actually talk about where you want to spend your money when you don't know if you're going to have the money to spend. And it complicates your lives. So we're hoping to get done in time for a whole lot of reasons, but I'm going to focus in on you and hopefully for you that it gets done on time.
Thanks, Dan. Really appreciate it. There are no questions in the chat from our
Okay.
folks. But really grateful for you being here and
Okay.
sharing what you know with us. Makes us smarter and hopefully more ready to advocate. So
Yep.
appreciate
And if there are questions, ask them to Marissa and she can relay them, or you can get to me directly anytime. More than
Yeah.
happy to help you out.
There's a question, one last question. Did Dan say it would be a decrease from 20% to 5% or to $5? I think you said both.
Actually, it's from 20%, from $300 million down to $5, 20%, and I believe the percentage number is like about 1%.
Hmm.
I'd have to do the math. I can't do the math on the fly, but it's just let me just say it's a minor increase compared to what we actually need and what we asked for. How's
Yeah,
that?
the striking amendment document, which I will put in the chat for you all here momentarily, does at the bottom of striking amendments, it lists the effect that the amendment would take, and it says that the effect of the striking amendment would reduce the total amount to a $5.50 increase per pupil. They actually told us in the effect, which is helpful, question mark.
Well, that's not really meant for you to actually read and criticize. It's for legislators to figure out whether or not they can support it or not.
Right. All right.
And
Now people are getting warmed up. We'll take one more question and
okay.
then pass it on to Levon. Any update on bond 60, 50, 55, 57?
Yeah, just really quickly. So everybody knows the Senate Joint Resolution 8200 and House Bill 5186 was changed from the 55% down to simple majority. Part of the reason the bill is moving is there's been a bargain worked out with the Building Industry Association of Washington. It includes an elimination of school district impact fees. We have not taken a firm position on the deal yet. We're still working the numbers, trying to figure out how much districts really are going to be negatively impacted. And we're working on language with legislators and legislative staff. And what I told legislators specifically is we want the simple majority. This would be a good thing. We can't actually commit to supporting this deal until we figure out how impacted our districts are going to be. And we don't want to get a win at the expense of a certain set of districts. So the other thing we're looking at is some kind of bridge funding or some other mechanism to provide those districts that are going to lose impact fees with something to cover them. So that bill is presumably going to get out of Ways and Means by tomorrow. And what our message is, what our message to our members was, is whether you like the impact fee deal or not, we encouraged you to actually support it, sign in pro, because we want to keep the bill moving and have the conversation going. And just a technical issue, if folks came in and were concerned about the impact fees and that bill died, we would not have it revived. It would not happen. So it's a lot easier to actually have a bill go forward and pull the plug at the end and say we don't want any more and kill the bill, as opposed to actually trying to revive a dead bill. So we're continuing to support it publicly, but we're talking internally about what this really means.
Fair enough. Thanks, Dan. Okay, that's it. That clears the queue. You're off the hook. Until next time. Appreciate you, Dan.
Will there be a next time?
Yeah, absolutely. Remember, you were one of the folks requested by membership to hear from. So one time just cannot be enough, possibly. Appreciate you, Dan. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right. So without further ado, in the time we have remaining, I want to be sure to give space to WSSDA's advocacy and policy analyst, Levon Williams. One of the reasons we were excited to bring Levon onto our team is that he has unique background and experience professionally in supporting and serving students more at the local level. And we haven't talked a lot about student-centered bills that continue to progress through the legislative session. So he and I were talking about some of the valuable ways you can keep focused on some of the proposed legislation that has real classroom, staff, and student level impacts beyond just talking about school funding, which is important, but not the only thing that's important. So I'm going to pass it to you, Levon, to tell us what are some other things that are going on with the legislature besides all this? Give us some hope. What's good?
I'll try. I'll try my best to give the hope. Hey, thank you for the introduction, Marissa. Yeah, Levon Williams, the advocacy and policy analyst. I believe there are some things we should keep an eye on that are student centered to really, I guess, continue to support the overall success of students, communities, and districts, and throughout the state of Washington. Let me share my screen actually with folks. Sorry. So sorry, bear with me. Are folks able to see?
Sure
Oh,
can.
I'm dealing with some issues over here on my screen. We good to go? Alrighty. So as Marissa stated earlier, I think these are some important bills to, can folks see my notes?
Yes, we can see your notes.
Okay. Uh,
If you click on use slideshow up there on the top, what has the double screen right above where you're seeing, there you go. That should move it to what just the viewer. Perfect.
cool. I do want to show my notes. I don't want to show my notes, but I do want to actually read from my notes. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Just give me 1 second. Can folks still see my notes?
We
Yeah.
can.
Okay, I don't really. Hey. So I think these are some really important bills. That, as I stated earlier, that's centered around student success and student development. We're looking at dual language, dual credit opportunities, really improving pathways for students, and also strengthening civics and media literacy in education. I think that's a really big one. Um, as we're looking at these bills, it's really essential to consider the benefits and the challenges that come along with these bills that are passed. As I go through my brief presentation, I'll talk to you about the impacts that it will have on the districts, whether in terms of educators, students, and just the overall district community. Um, I This is hilarious. I'm sharing my notes and I'm reading from them. I believe that majority of these bills provide opportunities for students to really to gain some valuable skills, whether that's certifications at an early age, having more opportunities in the workforce development stage. I think students can will be prepared and better informed in terms of civic engagement and having a pulse on what's happening at the state and local level. I think that's really important for students to grasp those concepts. Um, Districts, I think this will offer a form of funding and resources and curriculum in terms of the civic engagement bill. Um, let me as I'm thinking about you know all three of these bills. 1237, which is a House bill. Prime sponsor is Senator Paul. Currently, it's scheduled for executive session, I think today or tomorrow. And looking at this bill, I think some of my notes, as you can see, I don't want to go for word. I think there are some benefits from 1273 in terms of school districts having a chance to apply for grant funding, to update curriculum, to train staff, to improve the reporting systems for dual programs, dual credit programs. I think there's some curriculum alignment there as well. Districts could be more aligned with CTE courses and to really connect with the job sectors and create somewhat of a pipeline of success for students to enter the workforce and also have opportunities such as apprenticeships. Um, there are some concerns about the bill, right? Like I think the funding uncertainty is one of the big concerns. Is it long term? Is it sustainable? Is it sufficient for districts? Some districts might, deal with the challenges of updating their curriculum. You have the staff trainings, right? Like how would that look? And also implementing new technology systems. I think some districts might be opposed to that. And another concern that comes to mind is the equity component. Will all districts have access? And especially those districts who are come from vulnerable populations and those who have limited resources. I think that could be a challenge. And to conclude, I think 1273 is really important because it create continue to create pathways for students in the dual credit sphere, and students could really benefit from this. And I think I think this bill would really help align um, education with the industry needs and workforce, as I was stating earlier. So I just wanted to highlight 1273. I think it's a good change. we're keeping an eye out on that bill, and more to come on that. So House Bill, as we move on, House Bill 1722, the prime sponsor is Representative Connors. Right now, it's in the Rules Committee. It is not scheduled for public hearing at the moment. To give a high-level brief overview, I'll try not to read verbatim from my notes, as you could clearly see them. It's really aiming at removing barriers for 16 and 17-year-olds to in the CTE courses, especially in EMS programs and fire services, to have more access to these type of professional trainings and programs for these young students. I think some of the benefits of this bill is districts will need to adjust their CTE programs to allowing younger students to begin the EMS and fire services trainings. This is another great opportunity for students to enter the workforce early and gain valuable experience and pursue certifications that really are in high demand at the moment. And it's just a great opportunity for younger students to have access to these type of opportunities. And and there are some concerns probably, right, with this bill. Funding and right staffing could really be a challenge. I think there's liability and safety component that comes along when you have youth in these high risk professions that could really raise some safety concerns and potential some legal liabilities. Um, to conclude on this bill, I would say that uh, it really expands opportunities for the young students to gain some valuable certifications in the profession earlier. So, um, however, the districts look at this and they understand there's challenges, whether there's resources, and they have to look at the safety component and have an equity lens on this. I think this is a really good opportunity for students to have access at such an early age. And lastly, I'll go over 5637. It's talking about the having students have the media literacy in curriculum and within the school district. So, teachers and will have to expand curriculum and support students and learning their civics education and giving them just like a basic overview. But I think it's important to highlight some of these components of this bill and like how students will learn about the legislative process and how elections work and how being a registered voter, and I think those are all relative skills in today's political climate. um, I'm not going to read word for word, but to conclude on this bill, I would say it really strengthens students ability to engage throughout the media and civic engagement process. There might be some challenges, obviously, in terms of curriculum, resources, staffing. I think from a standpoint of like, what are the guardrails? Will it be a partisan curriculum at districts? So overall, these bills are really centered around student development and really improving access for students entering the workforce, for students to engage in media literacy and understand, basic civics 101 at the school level. And to support that, teachers will be provided with trainings and so on. So I think that's really important. But overall, I'll stop sharing my screen. Sorry about that. I have my notes. This feels really out of the loop, but I think it's important. We'll keep an eye on these bills, and I'll report back to you hopefully soon.
Thanks, Levon. Appreciate it. I think it's
Yeah,
always important for our members to remember that they have problems with technology, and so do we sometimes. It happens. It is just the way things work, even post-pandemic. We're always trying to figure out how things go. So thank you so much for the overview. I think it's really important for us to remember that there are really student-centric bills that are happening in addition to school funding bills. So nice to keep our eye on those prizes. I'll also just note that last bill that Levon reviewed about media and civic literacy was brought forward by the Legislative Youth Advisory Council. It's a group of students from across the state in partnership with a Republican legislator. So a really nice sort of student voice, Republican-led, minority caucus-led proposal that's very student-centered and classroom supporting. So very cool. I'm going to share one last thing in the few minutes that we have remaining. I wanted to remind all of you that we have advocacy work that continues even after the legislative session. And so I wanted to be certain you had on your radar and were remembering that every year school boards have the opportunity to submit position proposals through the position proposal window. Say that 10 times quickly. Position proposal window. So you'll note here a variety of activities and events and resources that WSSDA provides in support of your advocacy efforts, both during session and in the interim. And I would draw your attention to the month of April. We will still be in a legislative session. We may still be in a legislative session in May too, but we will definitely be in leg session during April, and simultaneously we'll be accepting for the entire month proposals that would impact WSSDA's position catalog. So you have 233 currently adopted positions that include both legislative and permanent positions. You could propose either consolidation of duplicate or overlapping positions. We like that idea. You could also suggest retirements of positions that are maybe obsolete, out of date, no longer applicable to the work that we do, or maybe have already been achieved. Thereby, those two options would reduce the number that we have. Then you could also revise existing member adopted positions or propose new member adopted positions. All of those proposals are reviewed by the resolutions and legislative committees in May and June. They provide a recommendation of do pass or do not pass for all of those proposals. And then membership by voting delegate. Each board has a voting delegate representing the school board, has the opportunity to come to General Assembly in September to vote for or against position proposals. And you'll have the opportunity to see all of those proposals packaged into one document called the General Assembly Handbook, which will be released July 1st. So just wanted you to remember that if you're considering position proposals of any kind, you should be having those conversations during your board meetings or work sessions in the month of March. Your board has to agree by majority vote to submit proposals on behalf of your board through that window, and that window will be open through the entire month of April. So if you're meeting 2 times a month, you could cover these things in 2 of your March board meetings, make an adoption or take a formal vote at the beginning of April, and then submit by the end. So just wanted to give you ample timing so that you don't realize it's mid-April and you've run out of board meetings to have this discussion and therefore don't have the opportunity to weigh in. So just a reminder about your year-long advocacy work. And we are at time, so I am going to say thank you so much for all of the work that you do and for sharing your time with us today. This will be recorded and posted to our website along with all the previous in-sessions. Please keep that pedal to the metal. You should be writing to your Senate Ways and Means and House Appropriations committee members, even if they're not your legislators. I would encourage you to write to them and let them know how some of these bill proposals or striking amendments would detrimentally impact your district budget. Talk to you soon. Thank you so much. Bye.